We've just had the May FOMC. Jerome Powell, unfortunately, delivering some pretty harsh news to bulls. There's been no commitment to any rate cuts. Not at obviously this meeting. Rates have been left unchanged. Not at the next meeting. And indeed, no commitment to rate cuts at all this year. They're going to be data dependent. So they're not going to preempt the data. They believe that they don't have to be preempting the data. They can actually just be reactive. They don't believe there's any value to doing preemptive rate cuts. They've also said that they're going to continue with QT, so there's no QE for now. The continuation of quantitative tightening. This is where the Fed is taking assets off the balance sheet as opposed to actually purchasing assets and putting them onto the balance sheet, which would be quantitative easing. No mention of that whatsoever today. Jerome Powell talking about tariffs being worse than originally expected. So they're going to wait for more data to come in to actually make any decisions. So one of the big things I've been talking about on the channel in terms of what I would want to see to go from being currently quite bearish on the crypto market to being more bullish again would be a Federal Reserve policy shift. And that is absolutely not what we have got at today's meeting, not even close to it, according to Jerome Powell. And I do think when the market eventually digests this news, things will probably go south, not just for the cryptocurrency market, but also probably for the stock market as well. So let's just dive in. I'm just going to do a very quick audio check. Yeah. So let's dive in to, I'm going to go onto screen share and I'm going to start by actually looking on X. So this is my profile on X. If you don't follow me on here, I recommend you do so as I'm active on here daily. I'm always making updates as soon as I can in real time in terms of my thoughts and opinions on the markets. Obviously, it takes me longer to get a video done. I will be making more frequent videos going forward, hopefully several a week, if not daily. But if you want to get daily updates from me, this is the place. And you can see today, I've just summarized this, obviously hot off the press 47 minutes ago. Jay Powell could not have been any more hawkish at today's FOMC. No QE, no rate cuts, huge tariff uncertainty, still QT, will not be preemptive. So this is not what the bulls wanted to hear. I've also shared other sort of charts on here today. This is comparing 2022 to 2025. So you can see, are we following the same path? This is basically what we did at the start of 2022. We came up above the yearly open. We consolidated for a period of, it looks like a couple of weeks, and then we sold off again. So are we going through a similar pattern of some consolidation above the yearly open, only to come off again? Obviously, if we did follow the path from 2022, that would mean lower prices likely over the next 2 to 3 months for Bitcoin, taking out the recent lows around 74,000. And what else have we got here? So this, I think, is one of the most important charts right now in crypto. It's a visual that really, for me, shows the health of the crypto market, especially retail demand, as obviously retail are the common users of exchanges. And if they're not buying and selling crypto on exchanges, then of course exchange volume is going to tail off. And that is exactly what we're seeing. So this is the daily exchange volume. This is the 7-day moving average. And you can see it is completely tailing off. We're back to levels that we saw in the middle of last year before we got the run up. Obviously, we were down around 50 to 70,000 throughout this period. Right now, obviously, we're up at 95,000, but the volume is back down to where we were when we were trading between 50 and 70,000. So obviously the midpoint of that being 60,000. Do we come back down to those sort of summer price levels later on this year that we saw last year based on this volume tailing off? I do think this could be a little bit of a leading indicator as to where price could be going over the next few months. So that is something that I'm certainly paying attention to. And there's other bits I share on here. Obviously, big premium on Bitcoin today on Coinbase. I wonder who is buying. We all know who the big buyer on Coinbase is certainly, if you follow crypto, you will know that is where Michael Saylor buys his Bitcoin for MicroStrategy. So could it be that Michael Saylor is on the bid? Is he sat on his Coinbase? Is he buying huge amounts of Bitcoin here, trying to get the price pumped up towards the 100K mark? It well could be. And obviously, there's other bits of info I share on here. Also, some analysis on gold as well, talking about taking a short on gold last night due to some confluence with the TD9. That's the Tom DeMark sequential 9. And we've had one of these print on the 5 day. And if we look at previous prints on the 5 day, just on this chart, we can see we got a reversal off this 9, a reversal off this 9, a reversal off this 9. And will we get reversal of this 9 that's just printed here? We can see it a bit more clearly here, quite possibly. Price, I believe, now is under 3,400. So we're about sort of $40 down or so from where I actually shared that. So you can see I'm always active here. These are all posts that I've done over the last day. So like I say, if you do want my real-time, up-to-date analysis on the market, please do come and follow me on X. Okay, that's enough with the X shill. But actually, I thought it was relevant to comment on these posts because obviously all of this information is, up to date, is relevant information. And that kind of gives a nice lead into where I want to go when looking at the charts because obviously, I had talked about in my last video, we are coming into an area of key resistance here on Bitcoin. Bitcoin coming into its 618 to 0.65 Fibonacci retracement, also known as the golden pocket. We're also coming into a ascending trend line that has been connecting quite a few lows through here. And we just seem to be responding well to this, both on the downside coming into this trend line and also using it as resistance now coming up to it. And currently it is acting as resistance. We are getting a little bit above the trend line, but it still is acting as resistance as we are here. We also have a long-term trend line that we're able to trade above. So this trend line goes back and it connects our prior bull market highs, and it's actually come into play in this bull market where we were able to actually sort of get above that trend line and trend above it. And then obviously at the end of February, when we had the breakdown and actually it coincided with me getting more macro bullish, that's where we got the break from this trend line. And sorry, is that the same trend line? No, that's a different trend line. It's this trend line. We've got one or too many, so I'm actually going to take this one off so we can just highlight that one and see it a bit more clearly. But it's this trend line. So obviously, when we did break this trend line, this is when I started to get really bearish on the market. I'm really beneath sort of 93, 92,000. This breakdown here, I remember it quite clearly being on a Monday night and actually getting that breakdown on the Monday night, and then it was early hours of the Tuesday morning that I was starting to get out of positions. So I remember that very vividly. And we've actually reclaimed it here. So what we really need to ask ourselves is this a breakout that we should be confident in, or is this literally just a bit of a bull trap that we're putting in here before we actually lose this trend line again and roll over? And I think, look, I think this can still go one of two ways. I can still see a scenario where Bitcoin does trade a bit higher here, potentially up to the 786, and it puts in a trap above 100,000. But I just can't really see this being sustained for the issues I've already mentioned. I mean, talking about the daily exchange volume just absolutely falling away, talking about how hawkish the Federal Reserve have been. We need lower interest rates. We need QE. We need liquidity coming into this market to keep this bull market going. And right now, we're just seeing a complete absence of it. So the macro is not supportive of crypto rallying to higher prices. Of course, back here, we had all of the Trump stuff. We had the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve being signed, executive order being signed. We had obviously Trump coming into office as the crypto president. A lot of that hype is now gone. And we just have to ask ourselves, is it realistic that we actually get back up to these prices? Obviously, this was a time where the stock market was roaring as well. This was obviously pre-tariffs as well. So there was a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of things to be, I'd say, a bit more optimistic about. And we don't really have those factors in play anymore. So Like I say, if I'm being completely cynical about this market, and I think I need to be in a way, the one thing holding this market up right now, I think, is one man, and that man is Michael Saylor, that keeps on raising cash to buy Bitcoin. And I think we can know or have some proof of that in the fact that when he wasn't buying Bitcoin, we moved all the way down to our sort of 74,000 mark. And this was a period where Michael Saylor was not buying. And then he managed to raise some money again. And of course, now prices started to go up. And if you look back, he was buying huge amounts back here, really from the start of November, and this resulted in the massive rally we got all the way up above 100,000. So, yeah, it really seems to be Michael Saylor versus market gravity at the moment. Can one man keep this market propped up for much longer, or do we start to see? Well, I already think that his buys are being used as exit liquidity. So what can I say? Without him in this market, I would be very confident in calling a move down probably towards 70,000, maybe even lower. With Michael Saylor in this market, it is possible that he is able to top blast Bitcoin up above 100,000. But I do think he will be used as exit liquidity. And remember, he is not the only participant in this market. There's other very big players in this market that are probably looking now and saying, well, a lot of these people would have bought their Bitcoin in 2022, 2023, maybe even in the summer of last year, 2024. And of course, the majority of crypto participants today, I would say, are more people that have been around the crypto space for a little while. I don't think there's a lot of new retail coming into the market. And that is evidenced by our daily exchange volume being down. I don't talk to a lot of people that are still in this market that got in last year, for example. Most people got in the last bull run. So you're talking to people that understand the workings of this market, and many of them would have known that if we buy our Bitcoin in 2022, 2023, then 3 years on from that, a year after the halving, 2025, that is the year we want to sell our crypto. So what I think is that you have a lot of active sellers here. You've not got a lot of active buyers. You've not got a lot of new buyers. A lot of retail that would have been invested in stocks have seen the stock market come down, have seen their tech investments go through the floor. And of course, they don't have the spare investable capital to really be putting to work in the crypto market right now. Obviously, the economy is starting to slow down. So for me, there's just a lot of risk to buying Bitcoin here, especially when it's been propped up by one individual. And if that individual stops buying, then it is likely that we go south very, very quickly. So just going back to our charts that I have the paths on, obviously, first we'll start with the optimism. The hopium is that Michael Saylor is able to maintain the price above this sort of key breakdown level here that would really be above, let's call it 97, well, 96,500. It's pretty much the price we're at now. And if he's able to get us up to above 100,000 and keep us around this 100,000 level and push us through that 100,000 level, then it could be that we go for one final sort of blow off towards 120 to 130,000. That for me is absolutely on the cards. We might not get that high. We might get up to around about 115 where I've got this long-term trend line. But that really, this path here, I would only give it about a 20% chance. This is not my most likely path, but is one thing that we have to be aware of and have to be prepared for. This is why I still have a small amount of spot Bitcoin, but certainly if we come up to 100K, I'm going to be selling some. If we retest the previous all-time high, I'll be selling some more. If we come up to 115 or above, 120, 130, then I will be pretty much selling the rest of it, just because at some point this market does need to correct. So, and I think this will be very short-lived, and I think we would absolutely see probably some sort of inverse V shape up. I mean, we'd likely just rally straight up and then nosedive, because there would be very, very little market structure or support created here. And I think at some point, whether we go higher first or not, we probably come down into this range that we saw last summer, maybe even testing the bottom end of it, maybe even going slightly lower and testing some of these levels down around 40, 45,000, 35,000. And that would be where buyers would really start to step in and put in the next low of the next bear market. So obviously that is the hopium scenario. I think the more likely scenario that I would actually give probably an 80% now waiting to is that we reject from this level. We might go a little bit higher here, but I don't think that will be sustainable because, like I said, the volume is so low, the interest is just not here. And it would really just be the result of one man on the bid, which is it's just not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And I think it'll be used as exit liquidity when he starts to deploy the rest of this money into the market. So, it's whether it's what is more powerful. It's whether his buying is powerful enough to overcome that exit liquidity ultimately. So either we're going to push a little bit higher here, and like I say, we might get one final blow off if Saylor is able to overpower the sellers in the market. If not, I think we do come down. I think the stock market probably comes down and retests its April lows. Bitcoin probably comes down and retests its April lows, maybe then puts in a second lower high. Obviously, first lower high, this would be the second lower high. And then I think from there, you're getting the trend then of lower highs, and it would be inevitable that we would break down to lower prices. And we probably see the bear market this year. I think this probably coincides with the dollar going on a little bit of a rally over the next sort of 3-4 months. So maybe the dollar over the rest of this year pops up to this trend line, maybe above this trend line. But I think ultimately the dollar probably does roll over when the US start to cut interest rates. But obviously right now, the theme is interest rates are going to stay higher for longer. The dollar here had been pricing in rate cuts as early as June. I think these rate cuts will now be pushed back. So we probably see the dollar go on a bit of a rally here. And obviously the dollar rallying is actually bad for risk assets. So to have dollar falling and the stock market falling, that's why gold has managed to catch a bid. I do now think that gold will start to roll over. Like I say, I think we are at a local top for gold. It looks like it's putting in a lower high here after retesting and refilling part of this wick. And I think gold comes off. And then obviously if gold's coming down, stocks are coming down, something has to give. The dollar has to go up, really. Something has to go up. That liquidity has to move somewhere. And I think we'll go into an environment where cash is king. So potentially, if I was going to put a path on this, then we'd maybe be looking at something like that, a back test of this trend line, coming back down to similar levels. And then, we maybe run into these moving averages. And we just see the dollar kind of consolidate in this area for a bit whilst, which puts pressure under stocks, and maybe it starts to come off later in the year, and then we get a bit of a rally. I don't completely know exactly how this will play out, but I do think there's a good chance of the dollar sort of having a bit of a relief here, which then sends us down to stock markets then retesting their lows, maybe even making a slightly lower low. So that's kind of what I'm thinking would be on the cards. Maybe that happens by the middle of summer. If that were to happen by the middle of summer, then it could be that stocks bottom in the middle of summer, and then we get some big relief rallies in the stock market. And maybe that coincides with crypto as well, giving us a relief rally. If we're to say that would happen sort of June, July, maybe crypto also gives us a relief rally. But I just think at that point, crypto probably does decline. And this is where I think we might see a bit of divergence between the stock market and crypto. I think we might see stocks outperform crypto because, of course, crypto is pretty much a high beta play to the stock market. So when I say crypto, I'm really talking about Bitcoin. I think we could see stocks outperform Bitcoin because Bitcoin needs to make its much needed reset. And then if and when we really see stocks starting to fire again later on in the year, then potentially, I mean, I don't know if it takes so long, but I mean towards the end of the year, potentially that coincides with Bitcoin finding a bottom, starting to turn around, and potentially Bitcoin does start to make its way up later on in the year. So, I mean, this path here is really an extended bear market, but potentially it makes a low towards the end of the year, and then potentially stocks start to rally, and Bitcoin then from there sort of starts to recover and doesn't actually see lower prices. Maybe it just starts to consolidate and reaccumulate between, call it 35 and let's say 65,000. Maybe it does something like that in there and goes into a bit of reaccumulation. So again, all these predictions are very far out, but this is just really what I'm seeing over the next few months is probably some more pressure in the short term on the stock market, a bit of relief in the dollar, and then if the dollar does start to stall and stocks find a bit of a low, then potentially stocks can catch a bid. But I do think that Bitcoin probably struggles over the next 6 to 12 months compared to stocks. So those are my current thoughts. Like I say, I don't want to go into too much detail on alts right here, but I am thinking that Ethereum probably, I mean, I've had this path on for ages. It probably does carry on. It obviously just can't get a bounce back above 2000. I thought we would get more of a bounce. So yeah, maybe it does something like this. Sort of, it just continues to sort of downtrend into later on in the year when, like I say, potentially stocks start to get back to new all-time highs, and then we see a bit of appetite come back onto risk later on in the year. But yeah, I just really see Bitcoin and also the rest of crypto just kind of bleeding out over the later stages of 2025, and then potentially they have a decent 2026. And yeah, I think some people kind of want to push back on what I'm saying and say, oh no, no, that's not going to happen. But then I say, well, actually, maybe 2025 is a rough year, and 2026 ends up being a much better year, and they tend to like that a bit more. So I think the same with Solana. I think probably new lows for Solana later this year, and then maybe we get some relief into the end of the year. Uh, there's not really too much else I want to cover here. Maybe take a very quick look at Sui, just because I've taken a short position on Sui. So I think Sui probably does roll over a really aggressive pump on Sui here. Potentially it comes back down and retests its lows. I think most of these cryptos do retest their lows over the next month or two. And I mean, really, it's dependent on what the stock market does. I mean, if the stock market, I'm not saying it has to make a new low. I think the most likely outcome is it does sweep these lows, and then we see a really, really strong bounce from there, potentially to the backdrop of trade restrictions and tariffs being eased. Potentially, if we get down here, then that is when the Fed looks to actually intervene. We start to see more cracks in the economy, and then we start to see more aggressive rate cuts to actually help fuel this recovery. But obviously, at the moment, that's just not what we're seeing. We're just not seeing those rate cuts come quick enough, unfortunately. And like I say, in terms of the headline from today's meeting, no QE, no rate cuts, huge tariff uncertainty, still QT. The Fed won't be preemptive. I mean, I sort of listening to a couple of people, crypto people, talk today saying, "Oh, rate cuts are coming," or "Oh, they're going to start. Powell's going to start talking about QE. Like he has to do this, has to do that." He doesn't. At the end of the day, the Fed's mandate is price stability and to keep full employment. So, I mean, if employment's not going up and if inflation, there are still risks to inflation from the huge tariff uncertainty, then of course the Fed is not going to be preemptive. It's not going to react, or sorry, it's not going to act before they actually sort of see the effects of tariff, before they actually sort of see that the economy and the job market is actually worsening. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the tariff stuff. I'm just seeing if there was anything else I wanted to pick out here before I go. And this one is what I've already shared. I keep on coming back to it just because I love the fact that if this is so long term and so zoomed out. This guy here, Tony the Bull, Tony the Bull CMT on X is really good. I do recommend giving him a follow. He comes out with some really good analysis. And like I say, you just have to zoom out. You just have to see, if you look at these troughs, these were the times to buy. If you look at these peaks, these were the times to sell. Not always the exact time to sell. Obviously, this one missed by a few months. This one pretty much got it at the end of this red zone. And I would say this one is pretty much getting it at the end of the red zone. If this is the final high of the market that we've already seen, we've actually already seen the all-time high, then this is going to be spot on. So where does this tell you to get back into the market? Probably mid 2026. What have I been saying I expect Bitcoin to do over the rest of this year? Probably decline along with the rest of cryptos, and stock markets turn around at the end of 2025. Bitcoin finds a footing, and it's probably a good time to buy mid 2026. So again, this all sort of checks out well. And before I go, the other thing I did want to talk about as well, very quickly, was just the liquidation heat map. So this is on 24 hours. So you can see we do have some liquidity above price here around about 98, 99. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do get squeezed there. Certainly if Saylor's buying, maybe market makers look to run with that buying and actually use that to squeeze the price up to the upside. But we do, if we look at the 2 day, we do actually have it below here as well, down to 93. So potentially we get a move higher and then down to 93, or we could come down to 93 first, and then we get one final push higher. I'm not too sure. I think bulls are sort of running out of time to take us higher if they do want to take us higher. And with today's FOMC, I do think there's a real possibility that the market does start to sell off over the next day or two. If it doesn't start selling off from here or tomorrow, potentially it sells off into the weekend or maybe after the weekend. But I would have thought by the middle of next week, we will see the S&P back below this trend line, call it sort of 555, somewhere below there, 5550, 5550. I think S&P will be below there by the middle of next week. I wouldn't be surprised if we're below 5,500 by the end of next week. So that's obviously going to put pressure on crypto. But for now, we seem to be holding up okay. Like I say, that setup on gold I shared as well. Might as well take a quick look whilst we're here. Seems to be playing out. It looks like gold is ready to drop back down sub these highs. These highs are around about 3368. So it looks like it wants to come back into this range that it was in before it deviated below. And that could take us down to 3267 over the next couple of days on gold. So yeah, I really think the top for gold is probably in. Dollar probably catches a bit of a bid, and stocks and crypto also start to come over some pressure over the next couple of days. So I'm going to wrap it up there. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been informative. Really, for the title of this, I wanted to ask the question, is it time to sell? Is this the last chance to sell your crypto before the bear market? Like I say, based on what I've shown today, I do think there is about a 20% chance that it's not, that we actually go higher and you get higher prices. But I'm leaning right now towards the 80% chance that actually things are about to roll over the next week. Stocks are probably going to come down. Crypto is probably going to come with it. And therefore, well, you have you have my answer. You know what I think now. So, for full disclosure, I am almost out of the market. I'm probably about 90% out of the market. And like I say, I'll be selling the rips. I'll be shorting the rips just because it seems to be a surefire way to make profit right now. Seems to be taking shorts on cryptos that are skyrocketing. So I'll do a separate video very soon on my actual approach to taking shorts on cryptos in this market, how I actually scan for them, how I actually find them, how I pull the trigger, what I do with my stop loss, what I do with my position sizing. I'll show you a few examples. So that's a video I'll get put out this week. So do hit subscribe if that sounds like something you're interested in seeing, so you don't miss out on it. Please do hit the like if you've enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you all again very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, wherever you are, and talk to you on the next one.